There's an old saying that many are probably familiar with. It says, life is short, better enjoy it while you can. There's another saying that most of you probably are unfamiliar with. It says, eternity is long, better prepare while you can. Then there's another saying which I've added. It says, time is short and many are unprepared. We need to be about our Father's business. Many of us have family and friends who are not yet prepared for eternity. Many have not yet made a personal commitment to Jesus, and many more think they are ready for heaven because they were baptized or christened as an infant. They don't realize that going to heaven requires a personal relationship with Jesus. These teachings are to serve us to win our lost family and friends to Jesus before time runs out. Welcome to Making Revelation Simple. This is a commentary on the book of Revelation, which is based on the Three Woes series of books. In this session, we'll be covering Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered. Chapter 12 is a real stumbling block for many people. It seems to break the continuity of John's vision, so people tend to describe it as a flashback in time. In fact, chapter 12 fits perfectly just where it is once the reader understands its true purpose. In the closing verses of chapter 11, Jesus declared war against the forces of evil, and what we see in the opening verses of chapter 12 is an introduction to the primary players in that war. So let's go back and review Revelation chapter 11, verse 15. What we see is the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. Consider how one might tell the story of the USA entering World War II. One might say, on December 7th, 1941, the imperial nation of Japan launched a surprise attack on the territory of Pearl Harbor, USA. The USA is the original 13 colonies that declared their independence from Great Britain in 1776 and grew to 48 colonies or states by 1941. The story of World War II hasn't jumped back to 1776. You're just describing the USA by using a historical reference. This is what John is doing with the woman who is Israel and the child who is Christ. Let's look once again at Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. It says, there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. We recognize this woman as Israel and her child as Jesus, but the story has not jumped back to the time of the Nativity. We are told John sees the wonder in heaven. So what is John seeing in heaven? Well, just to give you an idea of what it probably is, I don't know whether it's this exact scene or not, but this is a picture from the software package Stellarium, picturing the night sky on September 22nd, 2017. And what we see here in this picture is the woman, the constellation Virgo, the Virgin, and she has the moon under her feet. She has the sun at her back, clothing her in the sun. And she has Leo at her head, Leo made up of 9 stars. And then she has the 3 planets of Mercury, Mars, and Venus, all aligned right there with the constellation Leo, making up 12 stars, crowning her with 12 stars. And then between her legs is seen the king planet Jupiter. So I don't know whether this is exactly what John saw, but this is certainly a very close reference of what John saw in the opening verses of chapter 12. As we continue on to Revelation chapter 12, verses 3 through 5, it says, and there appeared another wonder in heaven. And behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns on his heads. And his tail drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. So as John continues with the introductions, he sees a great red dragon. This is Satan, who wants to destroy the woman's child. Notice that the dragon has 7 heads and 10 horns with crowns on the 7 heads. The stars are fallen angels who followed the dragon, Satan, in his rebellion against God. As we reach verse 5, John confirms that the woman's child is the God-man, Jesus Christ, who will rule the nations for 1,000 years. So thus far, the principal players that we've been introduced to in these first 5 verses of chapter 12 are listed in the following table. We have Israel, the Jewish people, who's represented by the woman with child. And we have Jesus Christ, our Savior, who is represented by the man-child. Then we have Satan, who is the devil, and he is represented by the great red dragon. And then finally, we were introduced to the fallen angels, the demonic angels or demons, and they are represented by 1/3 of the stars of heaven. As we continue to Revelation chapter 12, verses 6 through 9, we're told the woman fled into the wilderness, that's Israel, and where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. That 1,260 days is exactly 3½ years. So now that the introductions are complete, John is continuing with his narrative. As we observed in chapter 11, Christ openly declared war against the forces of evil. Here in verse 6 of chapter 12, we see the progression of that war as the woman, Israel, is fleeing into the wilderness and hiding herself from the forces of Satan. Suddenly, chapter 12 no longer seems like a flashback, but it's continuing with the continuity of the story of the war that's taking place between good and evil. So John's no longer doing introductions at this point in time. We are told that the woman will be in the wilderness for 42 months, which is the second 1/2 of the 7 years of Jacob's trouble. Remember, we looked at this chart earlier in previous sessions, and we saw where the green bar here represents the sounding of the 5th trumpet angel. The red represented when the first woe was passed, indicating that the sounding of this 5th trumpet angel is complete. And between those two was the activities assigned to the 5th trumpet angel. And then we did the same thing for the 6th trumpet angel. We had the sounding here in green, and the second woe was passed here in red. And then we found 3 major activities that were taking place during the sounding of that trumpet. And then likewise with the 7th trumpet angel, you had the sounding here, and immediately followed the second woe is passed. And then finally we have it is finished, indicating that the sounding has finished and that the 3rd woe is now finished. And we listed 3 major activities here. And these are what John is now seeing, where the woman's fleeing into the wilderness, and the dragon is going to persecute the woman for times and half a time, and the beast is going to make war with the saints, the people of Israel, the Jews, for 42 months, indicating that this is representing the second half of the 7 years of Jacob's trouble. And the big thing to get out of this, we read these, we see these happening, what appears to be sequentially, but they are actually happening simultaneously. Let's continue on. Revelation chapter 12, verses 6 through 9. I'm actually going to start with verse 7 here. It said, and there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought against his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So here, where there's no question whatsoever, John is clearly telling us that this great red dragon is the devil, Satan, because John spells it out with no uncertainty here in verse 9. And he also tells us that Satan, the devil, is the deceiver of the whole world. So now again is a good place to establish the rules of how we need to study Revelation as we move forward. We just used the USA in World War II as an example of a historical reference. Now we can use World War II as the basis for our study parameters. And World War II actually lasted for approximately 6 years, just about the same period of time, the 7 years that the Great Tribulation, as we know it to be, will take place. And many of the world's nations were involved in the conflict that took place in World War II. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of stories that could be written about World War II, and many of those stories would overlap in time. So it is as John paints the story of the second half of Daniel's 70th week. We must recognize that John will be describing many simultaneous events over the next several chapters of Revelation. And let's look at our chart one more time. We just reviewed this, and I placed 3 activities here within this 7th angel's time frame, and we read them sequentially because the angel had to give them to John sequentially. He could only write about them one at a time. But what we were trying to portray here is what happens down at the bottom. These 3 activities here are defined here in these 3 bars across here, and they're all occurring simultaneously. Likewise, there's a number of things that's going to take place in here between this bar, which occurs in Revelation chapter 13, verses 1 through 7, and here this activity of the 7th angel is completed at Revelation 16:17. So we're going to have a number of other items that are taking place here, and they may not occupy the full 3.5 years that's assigned to this, but they're going to be happening at least simultaneously with the latter part of these 3 activities here. So all of this is happening at once, and that's a concept we really need to get in our mind, because when we read all of these things up here happening sequentially, our mind wants to put it together and make us think that it's occurring sequentially when it's actually happening simultaneously, all of them at the same time. So hold that thought and that concept as we continue our study through the next several chapters of Revelation. Continuing on to Revelation chapter 12, verses 10 through 13. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, "Now is come salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was cast into the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child." In verse 6, the woman fled from Satan into the wilderness. And here in verses 12 and 13, the dragon is persecuting the woman, most likely going out after the remaining Jewish people around the world who were unable to flee into the wilderness to get away from the dragon. And they're being attacked and persecuted. Revelation chapter 12, verses 14 through 17, we're told, "And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time." That's 3.5 years. "And from the face of the serpent. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood." I'm going to quit reading there, and we'll pick up with it in just a little bit. Many assume that this 2 wings of a great eagle that's referred to here is referring to the United States, but the same phrase is found twice in the Old Testament. You'll find the wings of a great eagle is used in Ezekiel 17:3 and Ezekiel 17:7. And in 17:3, it is referring to the king of Babylon, and in 17:7, it's referring to the king of Egypt, or the Pharaoh. Therefore, it is very unlikely that this phrase is referencing the United States here. But one might say, well, the wings of an eagle, America is represented by the eagle as our emblem, and we have airplanes today. Maybe America gave an airplane to Egypt to be able to flee into the wilderness. Well, as you check it out, if Israel was to fly from Tel Aviv or Jerusalem and anywhere to the nearest airport to this area, they would still be 200 miles away from the area that they're expected to flee to. Therefore, it's very unlikely that they're fleeing by means of air flight. It'd be just as easy for them to travel the 200 miles from Tel Aviv or Jerusalem to the place they're expected to flee to. It's about the same distance. So it's very unlikely that this has any reference to an airplane or to the United States in any manner whatsoever. Continuing on, we see where the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might causeth her to be carried away of the flood. But we're told the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood. The devil sends this flood trying to destroy Israel, but the earth defeats his plans. And continuing on with verse 17, it says, and the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which kept the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So when the dragon failed to destroy the woman, the portion of her that fled into the wilderness, he turns his attention to destroying the remainder of the Jews who are still scattered around the world. This concludes our commentary on chapter 12 of Revelation. Continue to the next video to watch our commentary on Revelation chapter 13. Thank you for watching.